Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.
A big warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Laurie Bell, science fiction and fantasy author, flash fiction writer, Friday fictioneer, reader, and your co-host for today, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country.
Fabulous. Hello, Laurie, and I am Veronica Strachan, aka we'll just pretend we haven't been chatting for 25 minutes. I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, science fiction, picture book, memoir writer and reader of many, many genres, too many to mention. Also coming to you today from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country. Very chilly day here in southeast Victoria, southwest.
Yes.
No, northwest Victoria. I'm in.
Oh, I'm northeast.
Northeast, yeah. Anyway, we're in local Victoria. So here we are at episode 138, and we're just mentioning that, of course, you've been helping on the podcast, co-hosting for more than 12 months.
I know, it's been a year. That's so exciting. So hopefully everyone's still enjoying it. We still have listeners. That's my hope.
We do. In fact, we received a very lovely email from a listener, one of our writers who loves our chat and banter. So thank you very much to everybody who writes in and gives us stars on the platforms and all of those kind of things. Because it's nice. Sometimes we do think we're speaking into the void, and much as we could chat all day, it is lovely to know we kind of have a little bit of something there.
Hopefully people are getting something out of it and not thinking, oh, here they go again, which is very possible. And that's fine too.
Just fast forward through the interview, but tell us about the interview today.
The interview today is with the fabulous John Kinsella, which actually took me a little while to get around to finally teeing up a time with him, because good old John is over in WA, and being in the southern eastern state that we are, the time zone is a good 3-4 hours difference between us, but we got there in the end, which was fantastic.
Good.
So I know you'll enjoy listening to John. Incredible catalogue. He has so much work out there, short stories and books, and author of Beam of Light, which we did chat about through Transit Lounge, but also so much more. So I think you'll all get a bit of enjoyment out of John's interview today.
Very good. And we gave away Beam of Light a couple of newsletters ago, and I just happen to have the books for this time, which are Criminal Cove by the fabulous...
I'm still waiting for my copy. I am dying for that one.
So SM Sowter, who we chatted to a couple of episodes ago. It Is What It Isn't by the fabulous Stephen Higgins, and you read the blurb and that is just hilarious. Can't wait to spotlight that one.
That's going to be fun.
And the other one is South-Sightedness by Gregory Day, which is poetry. A poetry anthology. So a little bit of a link to the interview today, because I believe that some of John's work is a lot of poetry there. So here you go. So if you want to win one of those books, and I have to decide on Sunday who wins the last lot, subscribe, go to australianbooklovers.com/booklovers, jump on. All you have to do is put your name and email and you go into the draw, you don't go into the draw, you get the newsletter, choose any book that you want to do for the giveaway, send me a little note, and you go into the draw.
Yep.
And yes, thanks to our fabulous authors and publishers who did that. Yeah.
Yes, and we love to
But there
get
you go.
books in from as many authors that want to pop their books on the website.
We do. It's not obligatory, but it's free to put your books on the website. You could go to For Authors, add your book blurb, your cover, your bio, your authors, and you do the URL link of your choice. And yeah, all of that goes straight to the authors, which is fantastic.
Yep.
It's another way, because remember, people have to see things on average about 7 times before they will purchase, unless you're one of those impulsive purchasers like me. Sometimes it goes, no, I see that, I want it. Like Gideon the Ninth. I don't know if you know
yes,
that one.
that is on my list.
Yeah,
because I just kept seeing it everywhere and hearing such amazing things, and I'm like, I must get a hold of that. Yeah.
Yes.
But every time I go to the books, oh no, you go.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm just waffling.
When that other platform was on that shall now remain nameless, and Oz Rights was happening, we were doing favourite book covers or something, and somebody put that up, and I said, oh, I've got to get that. It was just fantastic. It was just, loved it. Anyway, there you go. And of course, then I read the next two and the next two. Like, I've just finished reading a fabulous series by somebody that we know. Well, it's not finished the series. I read the first 3 out of 5 of The Stones of Power by our fabulous co-presenter, Laurie Bell.
And what did you think?
I thought they were fantastic. I thought, why did I wait so long to read these? Because I was thinking, they're YA, and I've given them away a few times to nieces and nephews. And I've read all of your science fiction ones because I love those. Love those.
Thank you.
Big Boss from Hell, which I can see just over your shoulder. But I hadn't actually got around to reading The Butterfly Stone because I thought, oh no, they're probably a bit young. No, they're really good. Not only that, but they're chunky and there's great plot and it's a fabulous world building and the magic system is brilliant. And
I throw everything in there.
Teenage angst. That's right. There's thriller, there's mystery, there's villains.
Fighting siblings, which is always true.
Siblings. And as always, brilliant grandmas. I love always. In a lot of your stories, you've got brilliant grandmas, and obviously you're very close to your grandmas, and they had a big impression because you write what you know, and those grandmas are kick-ass. They are fantastic.
I love putting grandmas in everything. It's always fun and exciting. So they've always got a lot of info. And yes, in Butterfly Stone, there is one of my poor nanas who I do go into some discussions in regard to dementia and in a magical sense, of course. But yes, it was one of those things where we all go through, situations where elderly parents or grandparents are going through things, and it was a good way for me to bring that up and discuss it so that the younger ones can also know that everyone goes through this and you can be a bit scared or upset and that it is tricky. It is tricky. So my lovely Stones of Power, and I do have, of course, the final 2, and I know you're dying for those as well, but they
I'm dying, as are many people when I see other people reviewing. It's like, come on. She says with 3 years since her first book was out, but no, they're really well written, well crafted stories that just absolutely page turning.
And the print versions are gorgeous, aren't they? With the additional little chapter headers and imagery all through.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
No, they did a beautiful job.
Peeks. They did.
So hopefully,
and so
hopefully,
give your publisher a plug.
I will, yes. So Wyvern's Peak Publishing, and they have been going through a few things over there in the US at the moment. And unfortunately, they were stuck in a hurricane area as well, which didn't help.
Oh,
yeah. So it's been a little bit delayed, but fingers crossed, we will hear something very soon. So I am looking forward to being able to tell people soon, hopefully.
Good.
One day.
Good.
They are coming, though. They are coming.
Excellent. Yes. And that'll be in the news. But we should get to some news.
Yes.
I have
Mhm.
the short lists for the Australasian Shadow Awards were announced, and our fabulous Pauline Yates is on the
Yes.
short list. So she's on the short list for the Paul Haynes Award for Long Fiction.
Wonderful.
Read that carefully.
Mhm.
And you can find out more at australasianhorror.com. And for poetry, horror poetry, how about this? Because you remember, you may remember Pauline chatted to us about she was just going to do some horror poetry.
Yes.
But also one of our fabulous authors, Eugen Bacon, Hot Enough to
Yes.
Collapse, is on the short list for poetry from Galaxy Science Fiction number 263.
Absolutely
So
brilliant.
there are many other authors, but of course,
Mhm.
you know, I always like to shout out our authors and give them a little bit extra, which is very
Yes.
good.
Give them a plug.
Two more things. Actually, I've got
Mm.
three more things, but I'll be
Okay.
quick. The ASA has
Mhm.
the Australian Society of Authors. As we know, we often have a lot of their material. Now, they've
Mhm.
got fabulous resources. A lot of them are free, but some of them are only free to members. But there is now a First Nations resource, which is called More Than Words, Writing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Culture and Copyright in Australia. And it's absolutely fantastic. So if you're a member, you can download it for free and you can read through it and see how to, you know, there's a little graphic and, you know, do you need to consider this? Do you need to consider that? You know, about all sorts of different ways. And of course, encouraging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and writers, which is brilliant. So jump
Brilliant.
on to the ASA and have a look at their resources. And, you know, if you do want to join an association, union type something, the Australian Society of Authors is advocating for creatives in Australia, which is fantastic. All right, here's
It's
one
fantastic.
more, which
Mhm.
is when I was looking at John Kinsella's bio and those kind of things and thinking about poetry, the Australian Poetry Slam, because
Hey.
a lot of the Australian poetry competitions will be finished just before this comes out because it'll be a little while before we put it out. So that was no good. But the Australian Poetry Slam is a live literary performance program where the audience decides the champion. We went to some short story ones, some telling ones in Melbourne one time, and it was
Mhm.
fabulous.
How did they
So
go?
this has got 60 heats across the nation. The best slammers perform for the chance to win the APS national final, and in past years the ultimate prize has been an all expenses paid international tour to performing arts festivals around Australia, Southeast Asia and North America. So how
Wow.
it works is,
Mhm.
wait, how it works, let me just go. um, how it works, here we go. Sorry, I just had the wrong clip. How it works is that you get a microphone, a live audience, and 2 minutes to capture the crowd. That's tough, yeah?
That's stressful. Yeah.
The host randomly selects 5 judges from the audience.
Mm.
After each performance, the judges hold up scorecards using a 1 to 10 scale, and performing writers with the top scores go into the next round. So there you go. So you go
That
heats,
is nerve-wracking.
finals, and then national finals and international gigs. So if you're a poet
Mhm.
and spoken poetry is your thing, have a look at the Australian Poetry Slam and see when the next one is in your state.
That'll get your adrenaline pumping, won't it?
That absolutely surely will. And my final news, because
Mm.
we haven't had some news for a while, and I'm
Yes.
getting back there. So the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which is a fabulous organisation and one that I do donate to regularly, they've got a new Talent Pathways program. So it's a 2-year pilot program to prepare and equip First Nations participants to use their creative skills within their communities as publishers, graphic designers, and or writers. So if you are a First Nations creative and you want to have a look and get a little bit of assistance, mentoring, then jump onto the ILF, the Talent Pathways, which is fantastic, and have a bit of a look there. And you can read
Amazing.
about the 4 participants who are in the first group, which is brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Darren Boncrief has a little bit to say, the project manager, and he's got 3 decades of experience in Indigenous menus. So you've got some really good help there. So
Yeah.
Deborah Archie, Rosnia Brooks, Mawali Godden, and Brunana Waterloo. There you go. So all of those people are in the first program. That's my news. Go,
Amazing.
what have you
Well,
got
I'm
for
going to
us?
list very quickly. So, the New South Wales Literary Awards occurred recently. The 2024 Newcastle Short Story Awards occurred recently. The Russell Prize for Humour Writing Award. There's just awards going around. A Humour Writing for Young People award shortlists have come out.
Oh,
There is stuff everywhere. And a reminder that the Melbourne Writers Festival is next week. If you are in Melbourne. So that is kicking off on, I think opening night is Thursday, the
mm,
8th of May, because we're in May. Oh my
yep.
God. The other one that I had is through Australia Reads. There is the Booked Again and Loving It event that is on the 15th of May that you can jump on and join that. That is a register now. If you're in Melbourne, I've got too many Melbourne things today. I need to move on. Speaking of, okay, so the UK dropped their report. The Australian report came out recently, but the UK have dropped their report in regard to recreational reading in children and young adults. So this is also through australiareads.org.au. You can jump onto their news site and have a read. But they in the UK, they've seen the same downturn in engagement that Australia has with reading in
Mm,
children and young people. The National Literacy Trust's annual literacy survey reported that only 1 in 3 children and young people aged 8 to 18 said they enjoyed reading in their free time. And I think that 1 in 3 would
mm.
have to be all of my nieces and nephews because I've driven reading very hard for them. So they all enjoy reading. But
You're the book auntie. Yeah, same as
it,
me, the book
yeah,
auntie.
but it is a bit concerning with that. Reading is enjoyable. It is for fun. It's not just for school. It's not boring. And that primarily comes through parental modeling and grandparents and just people in general,
Schools. Yep.
aunties and uncles
Yes.
who are readers can show that
Yeah.
modeling as well. And just show them that it is fun. And it's
Yeah.
incredible the engagement that kids will have after that point where they've enjoyed reading with their parental figures or their grandparents or aunts and uncles or
Yes.
whoever they chat to.
Yes.
So I'm always big one to promote that. And as you can see, these reports are coming out and it is dropping and it is concerning because reading is so very important with kids and
Yeah.
it does help with their school. It does help with their schooling
Absolutely.
if
Yeah.
their literacy is up there and
Yeah.
yeah, I can't bang on about it enough and I
Enough.
will always bang my drum to that one. So
So if you're looking for great books for children, we've got picture books, we've got middle grade books, we've
yes.
got YA books, so all ages. So jump on
Yeah.
the website and have a look. And we've got chats with some middle grade authors
Yes.
coming up
Can't
in a few
wait.
episodes. So that'll be
Yes.
really good.
Yes. And of
I
course, the
especially like
Stones of
Ivan,
Power
I
are
highly.
amazing series that you can get a hold
I
of.
know, right? As I say, I keep giving them away, and I've
It's
finally read them, and I thought, oh, there you go. I should have just hung on to the first one. I did hang on to the signed copy that I said. I
I'm
will say
very
that,
glad.
and
I'm very glad. Well, I could definitely throw some more copies in if we're wanting to get them out there because I love getting and through the Australian Pen Pals
yep,
activities that is going on that if you are a school, there is a free resource, which is Australian Pen Pals that you can join each year and have a writer talking to the class and writing letters and postcards to the kids in the classroom about their
which is
writing.
fantastic.
It's a fantastic initiative and all schools and libraries can jump on, but schools can jump onto that and it's an amazing resource to have Australian
Yeah,
writers available.
yeah,
So
definitely. That was the
yes,
lovely Kate Foster started that, didn't she?
absolutely. And it is
Yeah,
going strong 3, 4 years later. So
it's
it's a great
brilliant.
great initiative. But yeah, you know me, I'll jump on my giant soapbox to talk about kids reading as much as possible. So we can move on now. Otherwise, I'll just
We
keep
can
going.
move on. No, I will just say there's one more that I had to share for
Mm.
lovers of Philip Pullman. Thank goodness, finally, the third book in the Book of
Wow.
Dust series, which is the follow-up to Northern Lights, is going to
Mhm.
be out, and it says in their autumn,
Amazing.
so that'll means it'll be out in our spring. The Rose Field,
Yes.
it's called. So, thank
I
goodness.
think I think Elizabeth. Elizabeth Townsend's new one is coming out soon too,
Ah,
which is
very good.
in the Nevermore series. So yeah,
Yep.
there's lots of great sequels are coming out in the next little while. So jump on them. They're great reads. They're
Yeah, they
fun.
are great reads. And look,
Oh.
I will say I'm currently reading Kate Elliott. I don't know if you know Kate Elliott's work. She's
Mhm.
her name's
Mhm.
that's her pen name. I think her other name is Alice. I can't remember what her
Mhm.
birth name is, but she writes Bricks, which is
Yes.
just fantastic. And
Yes.
I'm reading the second in a series at the moment, and it's based on Genghis Khan, but
Oh,
also some of the Eastern philosophies, but in space,
oh,
which is
awesome.
just brilliant. And there's a
Yes.
little bit of, a little bit of woo-woo in there with
Love
a
it.
few bits and pieces, but I
Love
just
it.
love the depth and layers and those kind of things.
Mhm.
And that was something that I particularly noticed in the Stones of Power book 3. Let's just go back to that just for a minute,
Yes.
which
Oh,
is the Crow's Heart, that
shit.
it
Yes.
just each book has added layers and layers to the world building and depth to the characters, and
Yeah.
they just you get to know them more and you go, oh yeah, come on, you could do that. And anyway, yep, anyway, very
And of
good.
course, as a writer, I think you've heard more than enough about the stress of trying to catch what layers I've put
Yes.
in each story and what else I can add to those. And it has involved me rereading them over and over and over again to cat because I'm not a planner. I am very much a pantser, and while I knew where I was going and knew what was happening, there were many moments I thought, hang on, did I did I say that? Have I not said that yet? So
This is good.
it's tricky doing a series. So I'm in awe of
Yes.
anyone who is producing their sequels and their thirds and fourths and ongoing series because it's tough work as a writer. So kudos to all of you.
Kudos.
Yes.
Can I ask you, do
Hmm.
you know what bildungsroman is?
No.
Well, Philip Pullman
Hmm.
has got that in, it means a novel dealing with one person's formative years or spiritual education. Did you
Well,
know
there you
that?
go.
So really,
No, I
that's
didn't
kind of,
know that.
you could say every YA book is
Yeah.
kind of falls in that, but all those
Yeah.
coming of ages, a bildungsroman. There
Yes.
you go.
Well, there you go.
Hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so that is
Hmm.
definitely Lyra's quest, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
I love the Northern Lights because your demon, your soul, was the little animal that
It's
sat on your
such a
shoulder, and
unique premise, isn't
oh,
it? I
so
loved that when I
fantastic.
was younger, and it's,
Yes.
yeah, so much you can go from with that.
Yeah, and you can imagine, what
Mm,
your demon would be, and yeah, all those things.
yeah.
Anyway, that's enough
Anyway,
about us. We've been faffing
yes,
on. It's time. This is going to be a really long episode. I might have to chop some bits out.
yes.
Time for some book spotlights.
Spotlights.
Book spotlights. Here we go. After the Great Storm by Anne Dombroski is a contemporary novel, which we gave away a couple of newsletters ago. So
Mhm.
40-year-old Alice Kaczmarek, apologies, Anne, if I've mispronounced that, has lost so much. She wants a baby, but her husband Daniel is serving a life sentence, accused of orchestrating an accident on Sydney's new transport system. When T, the subject of medical experimentation, crawls up the front steps of her house, Alice learns of a strange connection between T and Daniel. In this psychological novel of threat and intrigue, it seems everyone is involved in a scam, even a respected surgeon colleague. After she's followed and her home invaded, Alice no longer knows who to rely on and must navigate this corrupt, murky world alone. In the process, she draws ever closer to Daniel's friend, Lau. After the Great Storm is a novel imbued with both darkness and light, sadness and joy. Its characters refuse to give up on love regardless of the cost. Ultimately, it asks an urgent question for our times. When corruption becomes endemic, how can we save our own moral code? That's
Very
pretty
timely.
topical.
Mm.
Given we've got the election. Oh, let's just move on. Mentioned it once, I got away with it. Go, Laurie.
So, Anne Dombroski was born in Wollongong. She has worked as a teacher of English, as a foreign language, and as a teacher trainer in Australia and overseas. Her prize-winning short fiction has appeared in literary journals and anthologies. She was a recipient of the Varuna Fellowship and an Australian Council Grant. She lives in Sydney's Inner West with her partner and has one son.
Book number 2 is The Unintentional Medium by Suzi Samuel. Now, this is a non-fiction. What do you do when you suddenly realize that there is a whole other world outside which is opening up to you? You ride the whirlwind, hang on tight, and enjoy this whole new adventure of being an unintentional medium. This is a story of an adventure, a step into the unknown, a collision of worlds, and what happens to the unsuspecting young woman who happens to have been chosen by the spirit world to act as their messenger. The true story leads us through an eventful and often hilarious life, describing events and people, both here and in the spirit world, who have played such a part in this journey. A newly single girl on the London dating scene, and who, after several close escapes, finally finds happiness with her handsome Australian husband. Not only are the spirits extremely happy about this, they redouble their efforts to get their message across and pop in with increasing regularity.
Oh my goodness, can you imagine?
Ah!
You're like, go away. I've got enough voices in there. I don't need any more. So Suzi Samuel was born in Hertfordshire in England and spent most of her life in London. After leaving school at 18, she worked briefly as a secretary and then married her first husband, John, and settled down to a life as a housewife and mother to her daughter, Louisa, in Wimbledon. Sadly, after 5 years of marriage, John suffered kidney failure, and after a 3-year illness, including 3 transplants, he died in 1980. On her own with a young daughter, Suzi decided to go back to studying. After a couple of years' work, she passed her final diploma in French at the Institute of Linguists and became a member of that august body in 1987. She then worked as a teacher and translator for many years. Following the deaths of her husband, her beloved grandmother, and a lovely old psychic lady who had decided to pass on her mantle to Suzi, she quickly became aware that there was a whole other world out there and started to tell people really strange things that all came true. A surprise not only to the recipients of those tidings, but also to Suzi herself. This was the start of her work as a clairvoyant and psychic medium, and she has now been doing readings for more than 40 years with clients in many countries. Having negotiated the dating minefield that was the 1980s, and having survived quite a few often hilarious new brushes with matrimony, she met an Australian man, David. Following a whirlwind courtship, they married in 1997, moving to Hampshire, where they lived for several years before coming to Australia.
There
My
you
goodness,
go.
what a life.
What
Wow.
a life. But it does
Yeah.
remind me of a book I read of listen to, Leah
Mm,
Moriarty's Here One Moment, where a
mm.
woman who refuses to admit she's a psychic kind of thing. Anyway, great book, Leah Moriarty. But
Fantastic.
she gets on a plane. This is part of the blurb. She gets on a
Mm.
plane and starts to tell everybody date of birth, date of death, cause of death to every single person
Wow.
on the plane. It is,
Ooh,
yeah, very, very tricky. So yeah,
yeah.
it just reminded me when little bio that Suzi was telling people odd things that began to happen. All
Yeah.
right. Now we
Wow.
have, of course, Suzi
Mm.
is I was going to say not a one-trick pony. That's not quite right.
No.
Suzi has many strings to her bow is a better way to
Indeed.
say it. Yes.
Mm.
The Dark at the Threshold, also by Suzi Samuel, is a supernatural thriller.
Mm.
It's set in rural France. A young couple discover their dream home, but as they start renovations, they realize they are not alone. Gradually, an ancient force stirs in its honeycomb world, a force that has been dormant for half a millennium, but now awakens to face its old adversary. Set between 1468 and the present day, it is a magnificent page-turner combining nail-biting action, romance, fascinating history, gorgeous scenery, and incredible food. Great combination there, Suzi. So not
Mm.
only a fight between good and evil, it is also a love story. Chillingly realistic, it draws on the author's own personal experience of the spirit world during her work as a medium spanning over 40 years. There you go.
Fantastic. I love a good book with food. It's no,
Yes.
oh, now I'm hungry.
And I think that it sounds like Suzi's going to have some, fabulous insider information to put into that book. So that would be brilliant. So
Yeah.
we move on now to Criminal
Indeed.
Cove, Home for Retired Supervillains by by Scott Sowter, SF Sowter, science fiction. And as you know, Laurie had a fabulous chat with Scott a
I
couple of
did.
episodes ago.
Mm.
So here's the blurb. In Criminal Cove, Home for Retired Supervillains, notorious villains find themselves confined to a high-tech domed facility designed to keep their powers in check. Among them is Doc Shock, once a terror to New York City, now a frail yet cunning prisoner, grappling with his own rusting body. Through the eyes of Morgan Windchill, formerly known as the Torminator, we delve into the secretive world of aging supervillains, uncovering hidden agendas, unexpected alliances, and the haunting regrets of a life spent in pursuit of power. This darkly compelling tale weaves together interviews, classified documents, and first-hand accounts, painting a vivid picture of the line between heroism and villainy. As past misdeeds collide with a desire for redemption, the inmates of Criminal Cove navigate their twilight years, forever tethered to a world that fears and reviles them. Discover the untold stories of the villains who shaped history and now face their ultimate reckoning.
It does sound like a fun book, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
So Scott Francis Sowter is from Australia, born and raised in Western Sydney. He graduated from Southern Cross University with a Bachelor of Media with honours in 2013. He's married with two sons. Scott has always wanted to tell stories. He has directed a number of award-winning short films, also writing the award-winning screenplay, The Final Ride of Samuel Crawford, which was such an interesting thing to talk about. So, yeah, pop back a couple of podcasts and you can listen to me have a chat with Scott. That was a lot of fun, but what a great book.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And of course, is one of the
It
books that we're
is in
giving
the
away in
list.
the next newsletter. So
Yep.
you've got time to jump on, join up, and you can be in the draw for that if you'll send me a letter.
Yep.
All right, number 5 is The Buried Life by Andrea Goldsmith, and we gave this away last newsletter. Three people form an unlikely but spirited connection. Adrian is a renowned scholar, an expert on death in the modern age whose life has stalled. Kizzy, a young and passionate artist, has been rejected by her family. She hurdles through her days with defiance and regret. Laura is a successful town planner submerged in a seemingly perfect marriage. In The Buried Life, Andrea Goldsmith brilliantly dissects the conflicts and complexities of contemporary life in a story of love and friendship, faith and fundamentalism, subtly underscored by the power of poetry and music. You can stifle the past. Sorry, let me read that bit again. You can stifle the past, but it will breathe again. There we go.
Great tag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Andrea Goldsmith's acclaimed novels include Gracious Living, Modern Interiors Facing the Music, Under the Knife, Reunion, The Prosperous Thief, shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Literary Award, Invented Lives, and The Memory Trap, which was also awarded the 2015 Melbourne Prize for Literature. Her essays have appeared in Meanjin, uh, the Australian Book Review, Best Australian Essays, The Monthly, and numerous anthologies. She lives in Melbourne, Australia. Lovely
Excellent. We live in
place.
Sydney side, so nice to see the Melbourne, the Naarm people come back. Gorgeous. So remember, if
There you
you
go.
are an author and you want your book on the website, you can jump on and we will list it for free. And I'll try and do them as soon as I can. Sometimes it might take me a few days to get them up there, but we do. And the website's going through some fabulous changes where we'll be able to search by
Yes.
author as well as by
Which would
book
be great.
and colours. And there's be a little video on the front, me looking, saying awkward things. But anyway, shots of Laurie and I
Lots
having
of
a
books.
hilarious.
Yes.
Anyway, there you go. Must be time for
We
the
sh
interview.
we should jump into my interview with John Kinsella. Book lovers, I am delighted to have with me today John Kinsella, author of, and there are so many books that we won't be able to talk about all of them, but today we will focus on a marvelous book of short stories, anthology of short stories called Beam of Light. John Kinsella, it is so good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Laurie. It's nice to be with you after a
Oh,
few delays caused by myself.
oh, and myself too. Of course, John's joining us today from WA. So, and as you all know, listeners and watchers, I am in Victoria. We've had a few little time issues given the time change between WA and Victoria. So I'm so glad we were finally able to connect and to have our
Great.
chat tonight. So,
Thank
John,
you.
I am coming to you today from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country in Victoria. Where are you today?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I'm on stolen Balladong Noongar country, but where we are is literally on the edge of the sort of crossover points between Whadjuk Noongar and Yuid Noongar
Okay.
sort of spaces. So it's a bit of a liminal zone. There is
Oh,
Balladong Noongar, but it's
okay.
right on the edges. Because these areas they sort of move around a bit,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
people moved across areas and still do move, of course, across areas.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
though from Balladong, it is also Yuid and Whadjuk Noongar. And
Oh,
with
that
great respect, I say that because I feel very strongly about the acknowledgement and about the recognition that it is stolen country.
yes, and of course we give our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Indeed.
John, let's chat a little bit about your amazing books. So you write short stories and poetry. Tell me a little bit about your journey as an author. Where did you start? How did you come to decide writing was your calling?
Sort of writing's been part of my life since as far back as I remember, really. My mum wrote poetry and stories and so on. When I was very young, it was part of the ecology of the house. When I started reading, I immediately wanted to write.
Mhm.
When I was, a child, I ran a sort of little local journal, which I've discovered I'm not particularly unique at. Actually, one of my partner, Tracy Ryan's siblings, did the same thing in
Oh,
their
wow.
area.
Hmm.
But it meant a lot to me. A little sort of newspaper, literary journal. I wrote everything at the different times, as people do.
Yep.
So it's just been part of how I process the world. I mean, I've always, when I nursery rhymes were a hugely important part of my very, very early life, and that kind of way of turning things into stories that had a sound aspect to them that helped you remember, that sort of
Hmm.
aids to memory, if you like, mnemonic kind of thing. Had also a huge effect that carried into when I started reading books as such, as books. So really stories and sound, and a mixture of sound and sight, very interested in the visual as well. These things merged together and became part of a writing process. I mean, I don't prioritize or privilege any sense. I
Hmm.
don't think you need either sight nor hearing to make great stories. You just need a sense of being in the world. So I'm not kind of privileging any sense. But for me, as I developed as a writer, accessing the senses as I had them was really important. So always, really, Laurie, I've written since I first sort of started, recording anything. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I think that's the joy about good poetry and short stories, even just the crispness of the language, but also the flow and the tonality, and that you could almost hear music behind some poems and stories as you read them, that there is just I guess a vibe and a voice that comes through. So
Well, yeah, and the thing is that those qualities, which I think are present in all writing, but sometimes people focus specifically on aspects of it. For me, writing as I've been a lifelong poet, I've been a lifelong storyteller, but when I tell a story, I try and make it very musical and compacted. I'm not overly interested in stretching a story as far as I can stretch it. I mean, I've done that in longer fiction. That's a different thing. But I like in the short story to have those qualities of sound and flow, but also to keep it musically tight, if you like.
Mhm.
For me, I like stories to be really compacted and tight in that way.
Oh, I like that. Well, John, let me tell everyone a little bit about yourself. I've got your bio here that I want to read. So, John Kinsella lives on Burradong Noongar land at Jam Tree Gully in the Western Australian wheat belt and has also lived in USA, UK, Ireland, and other zones. John has published at least 50 books, and that number still astonishes me. His recent publications include the poetry volumes, the Nautica, am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Argonautica Inlandica?
Yep.
Good. And Spiral's collection poems, volume 3. Previous story collections include the awards listed Pushing Book, Transit Lounge, and Old Growth, also Transit Lounge. And his verse novel Cell Night was published by Transit Lounge in 2023. John is a founding editor of literary journal Salt, as you were just mentioning with the journals. It's obviously stayed with you.
It has.
Recently
It has.
expanding into genre and commercial fiction, and was international editor of the Kenyan Review. He co-edited a special issue of Australian poetry for the American Journal Poetry and various other issues of international journals. And he was a poetry critic for The Observer and is an editorial consultant for Westerly. Goodness me, that is a fantastic bio there. And I'm sure that doesn't even come close to commenting on the amazing works that you've got out there. To you, thinking of over 50 pieces, what sticks with you with your writing journey? Is there a standout book that you all everything poured into, or is that sort of broken into so many different bits throughout all your pieces?
Well, it is broken. I mean, because I work in, all genres and try and create a few as I go, everything's interconnected.
Mhm.
So I don't separate things off. But what I will say is the 3 volumes of my collected poems that UWA Press have brought out, this Ascension of Sheep, Harsh Hakea, and Spirals you mentioned, they represent a kind of life of writing poetry. The youngest poem in there is probably well, actually in the at the end I've got a kind of commentary on the whole process of collecting the poems,
Oh,
and there's actually a poem in there that's from when I'm 15, so it
that's
goes back,
wonderful.
but really from when I'm about 18 through to
Mhm.
when I'm about 60. So it covers a vast,
Wow.
decades and decades. So
Mhm.
those mean a lot to me. In prose fiction, probably, I mean, I'm very fond of this new book, Beam of Light.
Yes.
Pushing Back, which you mentioned. Also, that's my last book of fiction with Transit Lounge. But probably, along with Beam of Light, of all the I've published, 7 or 8 books of short stories, it's probably a book called Crow's Breath, which Transit Lounge also
Oh,
published, which I'm
okay.
really fond of.
Mhm.
Um, in Because I write in, many genres and invent a few, I suppose that what it would come down to, I have particular books in each genre I feel quite strongly about. But overall, I mean, I have in my longer fiction, I like you mentioned going into genre fiction. I write science fiction as well, and speculative fiction, and
Mhm.
the book Hollow Earth, which is a very weird book. Transit
Oh,
Lounge also did that novel. I like that a lot.
okay.
Another one called Lucida Intervala, which University of Western Australian Press brought out some years ago, about a very strange character called Lucida, who basically means intervals of sanity, and
Oh,
looking at
oh,
someone who rises to power through corruption in the arts.
oh.
And it's a very strange book, plays all over
Yeah.
the place, full of uh, philosophy and landscape and weirdness. So I suppose
Wonderful.
I like those kind of books that do multiple things. The short
Mhm.
story books, the great thing about them, Laurie, is
Mhm.
a short story collection can do so many different things in a
Yes.
relatively short space. And some people put together short story collections that are very homogenous, and that's
Mhm.
great too. I have themes in mind, and I try and go all over the place.
Oh,
Many of
wonderful.
them are set in similar places: West
Mhm.
Australian wheatbelt, in the West Cork in Ireland,
Mhm.
in Ohio in the United States, mainly the wheat belt. But
Mhm.
they have these landscape threads and they have these thematics, but they're also very different stories often. And
Mhm.
I like to be able to do many things in a book. whilst having those things you rely on, those steady kind of themes that bind the book together. So
Okay.
yeah, that's it, I suppose.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you've absolutely piqued my interest with a few of your sci-fis. I'm very much a sci-fi and fantasy and speculative fiction writer myself. Veronica will be very miffed that she missed tonight, actually, because she'll be very hooked on quite a few of those as well, I think. So let me just read the blurb for Beam of Light, since you mentioned that one. Beam of Light, shifts in tone, setting, and narration create a sense of the uncanny in Beam of Light, Kinsella's haunting collection of stories. A man is disturbed by the sight of a familiar dining table and chairs atop an impending bonfire of bulldozed trees. A girl finds a fox skeleton and feels compelled to protect its spirit by dispersing its bones over the valley. A couple are invited to dinner by Christians new to town, and which is an occasion that quickly turns heavy and strange. Two men awkwardly meet again when their daughters attend the same ballet class. And a man and woman struggle to balance the threats of addiction and poverty with the joys and hopes of a new baby. Stories range in location from Ireland to Germany to Greece to the Australian countryside, threatened by catastrophic heat, land clearing, housing estates, and strip malls. And Kinsella's characters, so often on the edge, sear the consciousness. My goodness, there's so many shorts there that I am dying to get more details on. How do
Always
these
happy to talk about them.
Excellent. Speaking of, how do these ideas come to you for your individual stories?
Oh, from people, I've been a keen observer of people all my life. It's interesting because we live relatively isolated where we are. We're out in the bush in the wheat belt, but you're still coming into contact with people constantly, and I'm just fascinated by the way people respond to the same things very differently. So, I mean, I've got a very distinct politics. I'm hardcore left brain environmental activist, very, very, very driven by the belief in Indigenous land rights and respecting country. And, so I have a very distinct politics, but my characters, they have very often distinctly different politics from myself. And I think that's what's so interesting about, fiction generally, but about the short story in the way I'm talking about it, is that you can step outside as the author and present scenarios of people who are so different from yourself. Try and do it without judgment. I mean, you're always going to have ways you move in any story. You're writing it, but I really do make an attempt to try and show people responding as people respond. And usually you'll have a character in there with a point of view that I might be more sympathetic with, but not necessarily. But you'll have characters who have very different views from my own, and they are toughing it out. I have a great sympathy and empathy for people who have addiction problems and so on. I mean, I've been sober for 30 years now. I mean, completely
Congratulations.
sober for 30 years, but for the 16 years prior to that, I was completely not sober ever. And, I wreaked a lot of havoc around me. And, I was lucky enough to manage to stop, to get over it, and to construct a pretty decent kind of life with good interactions with family and friends. And I'm proud of that. And it really matters to me. But a lot of people don't or can't. And I try and look at their lives with empathy. That doesn't mean I approve of some of the things they do. In fact, I very much don't.
Yeah.
Um, but I understand how people get where they get. And I think that the fiction writer has a kind of, for me at least, a purpose and a mission in trying to see how people got where they've got rather than judging what they are at the time. And I think that one of the great beauties of writing, especially fiction, is that allows a reader, allows us, I'm a reader as much as a writer, to work out how we sit with things, how to have sympathy and empathy about how people have got where they've got, and not be so judgmental. It's such an important thing for me in fiction writing, is not to judge. I mean, you might present some pretty terrible, I do present some pretty terrible scenarios and ones I deeply abhor. But at the moment we stop thinking about how things got that bad, then it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah.
And that kind of punitive, punishing side that humanity has is not worth anything if there's not remediation, rehabilitation, empathy, sympathy, and the belief that everyone can sort
Recovery.
themselves out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautifully put. And I've seen in a few places and heard some interviews that you've done where you, as you just mentioned, that you don't specifically set out to have the reader view a story a particular way or have them reach this particular ending. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, yeah, it's that not to judge thing again. And one of the reasons I offer what I call glimpses into people's lives rather than tell you what their lives are is A, I don't know to tell the truth. I just don't know. What I do know are things I've experienced, things I've observed, things I've talked about, things I've read as well. And as a voracious reader of the news, that's part of it too. But at no stage do I ever want to be able to say that is what someone's life is, because I just frankly don't know.
Yep.
And it's the thing that keeps you writing stories is the not knowing. I mean, if you really, really convinced you knew it all, there wouldn't be very much point, would there?
Bit boring.
It's a bit boring, wouldn't it? But that's maybe that's a politician's view of life, that they can believe they can tell you the stories and how you fit into them. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, we can know. And seriously, even someone we might feel is very wrong is still a person and deserves respect as a person.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about everyone.
Yeah.
There's some pretty diabolical people in the world, but they are still people. And the moment we lose sight of that and the fact they do have a story and they got there somehow,
Yeah.
then I think that we, narrow ourselves down to a dangerous form of ignorance. Yeah, willful ignorance. Not knowing something's, well, that's just luck or not luck, maybe, or can be. But if it's willful ignorance, that's a different thing.
Well, I think that can be a little bit more dangerous.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Yep. So with your stories and your poetry, how are you coming up with these characters? What is it that you see or an idea that sparks in you? Where are your triggers?
Well, it's an interesting thing because it's not from the type of person, or it's not
Okay.
from how I think someone is. It's from usually one single small action.
Oh, wow.
I was recently, Tracy and I were recently over in our regional centre town where we go shopping, and I was staring at something sitting in the car park. Tracy was in the shop. I was in the car at the time, sitting in the car park. And I got back and she said, so I told her something had happened. She said, I can tell this is going to be the next story. And it is, because it's just some simple thing that I've seen as someone's walked past, or as I've caught a glimpse of something in the distance, that triggers some kind of association with something else. So it's never, for me, it's never. So when you find a character in my stories, you can never say who it was, because it's never one person. What it is usually an event or a moment that has basically set up the nine pins so that they're all set up, and you sort of bowl the ball and knock them over. That happens because one nine pin's gone in paste, and then the rest are put in, just to use a really corny analogy, just because it's
That's
going
great.
to my head at the moment. But I don't play balls, but it just struck me as that could work. Maybe I've been watching too much Fargo or something, I don't know. But
Yep.
anyway, TV
New
series.
story idea. Something's coming. Something's
Yeah.
germinating.
Anyway, the thing is that it's usually some very small observation. It's not something great. There's a story I really want to write. Once again, I was with Tracy and we are driving along during the height of COVID, and the areas had just come out of lockdown, and we had to go across to see relatives who
Okay.
were being very housebound and so on. And we were coming back, and Tracy said, I don't know whose story this is to tell. It's either one of us who will write
Yep.
it. I don't know. But there was this bikie, and on the back he had a pillion passenger, a woman on the back. And I mean a patch bikie, a real heavy dude. And she was on the back, and on her head she had a candelabra. holding a candelabra on her head. No, this is no exaggeration. You only see that once in a lifetime. I said, you sure do. That
Yes.
story has been bothering away at me for the last
Hmm.
3 or 4 years. Three
Yes.
years probably. It will
Yep.
become something, but
Hmm.
what it is, I still don't know because
Okay.
it's looking for the other things around it to connect.
Hmm.
And that's exactly how a story works. So, often it involves conversation with other people. Often it is something you've seen and this whole thing about what does and doesn't belong to you is really important. I'm very careful about what I write,
Hmm.
and I try not to intrude in people's lives, and that's why they often become composites of things rather than. So I don't try and take someone's story of why they had the candelabra or they
Yeah.
have no idea. But
I'm
what I
dying to
do,
know though.
it's hard to know. But what it does do, the association is so strange
Mm.
that it suggests that something should be written about it because we were observers, we were behind on the road. It did affect us.
Mhm.
It made us more cautious, it made us
Yeah.
wary, it made us
Yeah.
bemused. So that's part of the dynamic as well. So I think that one of the things that's rarely discussed in great detail about fiction is how much we rely
Mhm.
on other people, but also in relying on other people, if we have a kind of conscience, how much we also try and work out where our line begins or
Mhm.
ends,
Mhm.
how much we can tell and how much we can't, and where we go. So I think there's
Mhm.
a real ethics behind writing any
Mhm.
story. Even
Yeah.
if you're writing something right out there that's very ethically challenging, William Burroughs or something,
Mm. Mm.
writing Naked Lunch or whatever, there's still there's still an ethics of text
Yeah.
involved
Yeah.
in some ways, certainly an ethics in reading it.
Mhm.
So these are all part of the process.
So, have you had ideas that have been in your head for years that might
Oh yeah,
eventually, yeah?
yeah.
What's one of the quickest story ideas that's come to you that you've
Well,
managed to get down?
this is a really interesting question. I have stories in my files that I haven't finished from 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I often when the set of stories comes out, I may finish them closer to the date when they get submitted to the publisher, but their
Hmm.
process is inevitably long.
Okay.
It's not remotely strange for me to have a story that's between 6 and say 12 years.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean I've been laboring away all that time at
Mm.
it. What it means is I have a folder in which I have what I call beginning paragraphs and outlines. I usually write a first paragraph and
Mhm.
then outline what I think the story will do. I put
Mm.
it aside. Sometimes I put it aside. 6 months is a short time, but it
Mhm.
can be, as I said, 20 years. I eventually go back when I'm shaping a book and I feel that there's something I want that's not there. I look back through my beginnings. I
Okay.
usually find the story that works in that capacity and then I write it. That's how the story collections get
Ah,
binding,
okay.
and the stories, though they're very different, often seem to speak to each other, is
Mm.
because I use
Mhm.
that process.
Oh, that's
Um,
fantastic.
it is a really interesting thing. So the shortest story would be one I've written recently,
Mhm.
which is which will be appearing in the Saturday paper. It was about an event, something that happened quite terrible about
Mhm.
3 months ago.
Okay.
And I worked on that story. I did a rough draft actually the day it happened. I did a rough, it's a relatively quite a short story.
Mhm.
I write stories between, basically 1,200 and 7,000 words, with
Okay.
the bulk of them probably being around three and a half.
Mhm.
So quite short, really.
Mhm.
And some of them, there are many around 2,500, but
Mhm.
this one's quite short. The event, as I said, I wrote it when I got home. I also wrote a poem about the same incident. It's very different, totally different, but it,
Okay.
it came out of the same event. I put it aside for some weeks or for a month maybe. I went back to it and rewrote it, and I put it aside for another few weeks and went back and rewrote it. And then I,
Ah.
went through the submission process with it. But the thing about it is that's very quick story,
Mm. Mm.
but really impelled story, one I felt needed talking about now. And,
Okay.
it's completely fiction, but
Mm.
the incident that it's based on, happened,
Mhm.
obviously.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's very quick. But
Mm.
most of them, in Beam of Light, there's a very long story in there. When I say very long for this kind of book,
Mhm.
the vaccination medley. So it's got the suggestion of a musical kind of structure in which there are three events about getting vaccinated
Mhm.
that are tied together. And that story was written over the rough draft over the period of the vaccinations
Mhm.
and then a couple of years of revising them. So that's a kind of, I suppose, a medium length process of writing that story. So there's
Okay.
huge variation, but it goes
Yeah.
back as
Yep.
far as 20 years. In my folder at the moment, I have
Mhm.
two stories left from about 20 years ago, which well, I call skeleton drafts.
Mhm.
And I just haven't yet, they haven't found their place in the same way
Mhm.
as the candelabra yet hasn't found its place. It's actually occurred as mentions here and there in other work, but its
Okay.
story is yet to be
Mhm.
told. Yeah.
Oh wow. So when you refer to skeleton text, what do you for you, what do you mean by that?
But what that is, it's always an opening lines or paragraph.
Mhm.
Always have that. It's just the way I begin, and a
Mhm.
title. I always
Okay.
have a title, and I have and that and my idea set. And then after that, what I do is a really I do usually I know my how I want to end it, but not what goes in between. I often have a note at the end about I'd like it to go this way.
Mhm.
Very often it doesn't, but that's what I have. And then I have usually, on the page half a dozen points
Mhm.
that might equate to paragraphs, but are ideas.
Okay.
Now they can just sit, as I said, for many, many, many years. When I
Mhm.
go back to them, sometimes I'm bewildered by the points I was making, and the story just goes a completely different direction, no doubt, than
Mhm.
I intended. But
Mhm.
because I can't remember, maybe it did go in the direction I
Yep.
intended. I don't know. But there's always that, what I call the skeleton of the story, that I can build on. And, or to use a clothes hanger sort of analogy, hang the story on, if you like, that sort of
Mhm.
thing, arrange the wardrobe or whatever. But millions of analogies you can come up with. But that kind of process. In
Mhm.
case of my wardrobe, it's only got black clothes and nothing else. But, so it's always one tone. But I try and vary the tone in the story. Yeah.
That's fantastic. With your story journey, so tell me then, how did you make that leap into the publishing realm?
Well, it's interesting. My first story was published in the school magazine in Geraldton High School. The story was called, it's such a vivid
Fantastic.
thing for me, it was a big thing.
Hmm.
I think it was year 12, but it came out at the beginning of year 12, so it was a year 11 story.
Hmm.
So I was 16 kind of thing, going on 17, and it was
Hmm.
called, wait for it, The Insane Plant. And it was about your ordinary run-of-the-mill house plant that
Hmm.
ate people. Now, that's not a particularly original scenario. There's quite a few horror movies based on that
Hmm.
premise.
Hmm.
But really, and it probably came out of reading Day of the Triffids, actually, when I was loved Wyndham when I was,
That book did spur a lot of speculative fiction
it
writers,
did,
I
it
think.
did. So imitation, no doubt, is in there.
Mhm.
But that's a really important thing too. I don't have
Mhm.
any problem with that. I think imitation is really interesting, as long as it's not, rewriting the same story or copying it. I
Yep.
think the idea of having an influence is a good thing. And that story was certainly influenced by, Wyndham and probably Little
Mhm.
Shop of Horrors and that kind of thing. But it did its own thing. And I reread it all these years later, many years later, it recognizably is myself, and
Mhm.
it had the quirks. I was my nickname at school was Dictionary. I was really severely bullied at school, given a
Oh,
hard
I'm sorry
time,
to
but
hear
I
that.
was, really, really severely
Mhm.
hospitalized and things like this. But
Oh.
it was I had really passionate, committed kind of beliefs about writing, and I
Mhm.
really wanted to do it. And I wanted to do something that I wanted to see things in a different way. And what is evident in that story is that it's peculiar. It's odd. It's not just odd because of that very cliched
Mhm.
theme. It's odd because it was the kid I was that was nicknamed Dictionary, who was whose circle of friends was small and
Mhm.
who was very intense and wanted to bring lots of different things together. So, as a story, it's a kid's story and it's a failure probably,
Yeah.
but in terms of where you begin,
Mm.
I can see a lot of the things that deeply interest me now, which I've got a lot more refined, hopefully, at
Mhm.
doing. That just comes through years of writing. You get more skilled, obviously, at doing it.
Mhm.
Whatever anyone thinks of my stories, there is, I think, an arc of development is that of some sort is that there are those markers. So, my recommendation to anyone starting to write fiction is those early efforts of yours. They might be imitative, inevitably they will be. And they might, be even clunky. They might not be too, but they might be clunky. But they will inevitably, if you write true to yourself and let yourself enter the fiction, not in terms of controlling voice, but enter in the texture of language, that's the beginning. That's the writer that you will eventually become. I think that's really interesting. And so that's how I began. I published, and then I gradually sort of went from there. Because of my addiction issues, I had long spaces of not publishing or not trying to publish. Like I published poems very young in Westerly magazine in Western Australia and so on. And then I had long gaps where I just kept writing, but was not remotely interested in trying to publish work. It just seemed pointless to me. But those patches got shorter and I got more interested in putting work out there. So these things, they have their own trajectory. But I think that when you start, you think of yourself not as how am I ever going to get there, but that you're already part of the way there. Because you really are, the moment that pen or key or whatever you're doing, or voice if you're recording, whatever you're doing, the moment you start that process of writing, you are your future.
Yeah, that's really nicely put. I love that. To come back to your arc, as you were saying, so the growth over
The
so
wobbly
many
arc, the wobbly
arc.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned putting together anthologies, but that you've pulled them from different eras of your writing style, I guess you could say, or focus. What have you really learned that you can see in your own work that has grown throughout the years and just the experience?
Well, the interesting thing about pulling collections together that have stories that come from over, a span of years is what I always do is I always go through multiple rewrites. So by the time you've rewritten all those stories together into a book, it's to a certain extent homogenized some things in it. So it makes it seem as if it's a book, it's all contemporaneous with itself. And in a sense, it is because you've rewritten and rewritten
At that time.
Yes, because as you're moving on from book to book or even story to story, but certainly we're talking about books, book to book, there are things that make, say, Beam of Light markedly different from another book, say, published 15 years earlier that's called In the Shade of the Shady Tree, which is largely set in the wheat belt. In fact, it's totally set in Western Australia, but the wheat belt, it moves around. It's got some overseas thing in it, but it's mainly in West Australian wheat belt references to overseas. And it's a very, very, very different book from Beam of Light. It deals with place in a more absorbed but removed way. You have to read it to see what I'm talking about tonally. Beam of Light is more because it ranges around the world. It's more easygoing is the wrong word because I tend not to write very easygoing, but it's more it has more space in the way it processes the world. It has more gaps, I suppose, not gaps in the way the story is told, but gaps in breathing. So it breathes more. And that so this storybook, well, it's a funny thing because some people read it and say it doesn't breathe at all. It's quite stifling in some ways, but what I mean is in how I composed it. Shade of the Shady Tree was a very impacted, condensed process. Beam of Light had more breathing space as I created it, and more room for me to allow myself to say, okay, I'm going to completely rewrite that story, which I did on 3 of these stories. So completely rewrote when the book came together, and I saw how they sat together. Basically, before the manuscript went in, and then after the manuscript, you go through an editing process where things change too. But in the pre-process, there was a lot of changes to try and get a mood in Beam of Light. And the mood I wanted to get actually is shown by the title story, Beam of Light, which is about a pair who, he's the bloke has got a serious addiction problem. His partner is pretty much at the end of tolerance with it, and understandably, they have a new baby. It's messy and it's fraught, and it's problematical, and something happens, an intervention that's very threatening. I won't explain the story completely, but it's a beam of light, a literal beam of light.
Oh, wow.
And what shifts, you can't really tell because it doesn't tell what happens afterwards so much. But you get the sense that something really
Something's
dramatic has
changed.
happened, and nothing has happened at all. That's the thing.
Wow.
And that's what I mean by that tone gave me, I really wanted that tone in the book, and it gave me the space, this point in my writing life, to think about the tone across the book. And that's what I mean by space. So the breathing space, my own, it's not other people's. And maybe because it's a post, it's not, it's a book that's got like the vaccination stories from COVID in it, but it was a book put together post-COVID, whatever that actually means, you know what I mean? To someone who has COVID at the moment, it's not particularly post-COVID.
No, that's true.
I mean on the mass scale and the so on. All of that's part of it too. So how we live our lives, the things happening around us in the world affect the way we put books together, obviously, even if they're, say high fantasy, it's still affected by the way the world operates. And I think we've got to be, as writers, conscious of, we don't have to be anything. We might be as writers. I don't mean it's not instruction lessons.
True.
But sure, but you know what I mean. As writers,
definitely.
I think it's good to be conscious that we're being affected as we put these things together in ways we may not be overtly conscious of.
Yeah. In the same way that upbringing and just the way the world is and all sorts of things will have that infection into a story.
Of course. And no, we can't separate ourselves off from anything. It's a funny thing about short stories. You've got these little things that, in my case, you could read in the sitting, and maybe even read 3 or 4 in the sitting. They seem to be just, that's it, they're done. But they're affected by everything that went into writing them, and they're affected by everything that's happening to you as a reader, that makes you as a reader. These things aren't separate from any of us. Whoever's story I read, whomsoever, I am affected forever, whether I like it or dislike it intensely. And I think that's such an interesting thing.
I think that's the power of stories too.
It is.
It does stay with you in a way that maybe you don't understand at the time, but that may come to you down the track where you think, oh, right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I'm have an interest. I've been with Tracy for a very, very long time, and her writing process is separate from mine, and autonomous. But at the same time, we obviously communicate and talk and read works and comment and so on. So affected. She's been working on this historic trilogy of the Queens of Navarre historical fiction trilogy.
Wow.
For over the years, and the second one's about to come out with Transit Lounge. And what's so interesting about it, because it's such research heavy work, and she does so much research work, I get to pick up a lot of the really fascinating historical details in the raw form before they're fictionalized. And there's a kind of generosity in that process, which I really love and I really benefit from. And I think that all of us as writers, that's a very literal example, but as we're learning to write, or as we're early writers or whatever, is to also realize that there's this incredible generosity of the world around us as well. And if we can tune into that and not take someone else's story or intrude, but if we can tune into it in a kind of respectful way, in a way that's conversational and dialogic, we can really, really grow through it. And I love that about writing.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing that you bring up. A lot of the authors we've interviewed of late, and myself included, and same with Veronica, is that our partners they're not literary. They're in my case, no interest in reading, which is frustrating, as I'm sure you can imagine. But how is that, having a partner who understands that process?
It's good. I will say, of course, that having a partner that doesn't read can also be really interesting as well, though.
Very true.
I mean, obviously there are, that's not for me to define someone else's, but it can be really interesting because, for example, over the years, over my younger years, especially in my, years of addiction, I lived in a lot of houses that were, many people in the house, and you had people from, all walks of life, and, people who were deeply into the arts and people who just loathed and detested it. And what I found it really interesting that in some ways when I say I draw on, I don't take, but I draw from the experience of knowing and interacting with people, especially in the rural world where I've spent a lot of my, kind of extracurricular life. So when I was younger, if I was rural laboring or anything, often I'd be rural laboring with someone who had no interest, especially in poetry, didn't want to know about it. But I found them incredibly poetic and very incredible, understanding, had incredible understanding of stories and of often told great jokes and so on. So literacy is a very complex thing.
Yeah.
And, so often we can be with people who aren't literary or uninterested in reading, but they have their own literacy. And if you can tune into that, you kind of
Yes.
grow immensely. But I am lucky in the sense that, I live with, and also our son's a poet. He published his
marvelous.
first last year of poetry, Tim, yeah. And so it's a highly literary house. And its literacy is obviously books, but it's also music and it's also film. And I make art as well.
Storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling. All those things are part of it. So I am lucky in that sense, and it's great. I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy those various literacies, but I'm not closed to many other sorts of literacies, and they are very important to my stories. Those other forms of literacies. One of my close friends when I was young, he was a scaffolder and a rigger. I worked a season in a fertilizer factory, and that was basically swinging a sledgehammer to break fertilizer off railway wagons. It was nothing particularly interesting.
Yeah.
But the stories I heard down there, and also though the politics have changed over years, the kind of hard left union politics I was exposed to, I was very, very young then, was really fascinating to me. And they were they were a different kind of literacy again, and one that's been extremely influential on my own writing. Yeah.
It must be great to have that person who understands the highs and the lows of writing in particular when you get those rejections or when you submit something or you've had an acceptance and you just want to celebrate. So that must be just absolutely marvelous to have as well.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a great warmth in the house, and but as I said, we actually function quite independently as well, and so Tracy's life is her life of work, and my life's my life of work, and that makes actually sharing a lot more interesting. It makes
Do you
it
ever bounce ideas off each other when you are stuck or something's just not right and
well,
you can't pin it down?
I probably did more in the first half of our marriage than Tracy did. I'm someone who just I just want to tell everyone. I just
Yep.
want to, and and she's very tolerant and patient for with this, and very supportive and kind, and would often look over a proof and so on. But we've fortunately moved beyond that interaction, which was very one-sided, to be frank, because she doesn't do that or need it or want it.
Okay.
She's a very self-contained private writer. I read it when it's finished, and when I read it, I'm reading something at the very top end. Whereas and because she's multilingual and so on, I've relied on her a lot for language stuff. Whenever I'm working on translation and so on, she doesn't rely on that. But there are other ways, of course. We share a life and we have very similar politics and ethics, so we're always communicating about things. We and we read often similar things and so on. So there is inevitably a rich and a warm conversation between us, and it's been a great thing for me.
That's fantastic.
But I do think you need to also recognize gender things around this, because men still, I'm really sad to say, I have to be honest about this. Society gives, not in obvious ways, but in ways that aren't seen, more time and more space. And people, reactionaries, think this is completely not true. And they say, well, look how many women are being. It's not true. It's
Mm-hmm.
completely and utterly still a patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still very unjust.
Yeah.
These things can micro exist in a, whether you're aware of them, you know,
Yeah.
I just know it's true. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's important to say, because it's all very hunky-dory for me to sit here and, you know, I'm given a lot of space in my
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and I've been given a lot of support. And that support is psychological.
Mm-hmm.
It's also practical. It's in the household and how labor divides up. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I might do a lot more outside, which I do. We live out in the country, but proportionally, if you divided it up,
Yeah.
I'd come
Yeah.
out much better than she would. And I think that that needs, and there's a process of rectification in that
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just, oh, well, stuff that, that's the way it is.
Yay.
No, but, and I'm not saying this because I
Yeah.
feel, obliged because she might listen or something. She wouldn't take any notice of what I said about these things, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying it because I actually deeply believe it.
Yeah.
And I have been trying to find ways of articulating this in my fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important because, blokes get interviewed, you don't hear it. And it does, it's not just in, if it's a male and female, it can be in a male, male, female, female, and the trans
Yeah.
situation as well.
Yeah.
It's any relationship, any dynamic of
Mm-hmm.
two, or in polyamorous situations it may be three or four, but
Yeah.
any situation, inevitably someone comes out slightly better in terms of the division of labor than
Mm-hmm.
someone else.
Yeah.
And I think we need to really think about these things and
Yeah.
think about how work is made, how it gets out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can be responsible to those we care for and care about, whether they're writers or not writers, I might add. The
Yeah.
general, but anyway, this is a lot where my thinking is,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm interested in all this. In my, the stories I'm writing at the moment are very much trying to look in some of these issues,
Mm-hmm.
and also to say really thank you because though we have separate writing lives in many ways, it's been I've enjoyed and benefited greatly from having a very smart and very
Mm-hmm.
attuned partner who is extremely good at doing things in a multi way,
Mm-hmm.
and that, yeah, so that's an acknowledgement of that.
That's fantastic. And I think being able to acknowledge that is huge, really. And the more people that can share that and share that acknowledgement, and that it's okay to acknowledge and it's okay to recognize.
It's
And
important.
yeah.
And people talk about how they talk about Australian society and they say, well, it's not as bad as it was in the 80s. Well, it's a lot more hidden than it was in the 80s. Because it's
Mm,
still a patriarchy.
yeah.
It still is.
Yeah.
And and I'm not laying blame, I'm
Mm,
sharing blame.
mm,
And it's not only, and as I said, it's not just, it is largely a male thing, but it's
mm.
not exclusively.
No.
There are complexities around, all interactions.
Yeah.
And so I'm speaking in broader terms, but I'm also speaking quite specifically from a kind of position of inevitable privilege
Mm,
within gender.
mhm,
And I loathe the labeling and narrowing down to, my masculinity is something I feel
mm,
very uncomfortable around and don't like, and I identify many things that aren't masculine, but I also
mm,
have to recognize that I've benefited greatly
mm,
from, people's understanding of masculinity, if not my own projection of it, and probably a bit of both.
mhm.
So you've got to start being a little self-analytical. I
Yep.
can't speak for other people, but I certainly
Mm.
can for myself.
That's fantastic. And that you can then communicate that out to a wider audience through
I
your
hope.
your work and through
I
your
hope.
poetry and stories. Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
absolutely believe that
I hope.
that's the case.
Well, that I hope will happen, and
Mm,
I think it has happened to some extent in my work.
mhm,
My wild experimental novel, Lucida Intervala, with this
mhm,
tyrannical, self-obsessed heroine who becomes the master of the, or mistress or controller of the universe, basically, is an absolute ripping to bits of patriarchy.
mm,
That's what the book's
mhm,
intended to do. It's a satire that's supposed to make you think, well, okay.
mhm,
It's just, I just get so tired of whenever you come across someone, especially writers who identify as women, And that doesn't mean they have to be who
Yep.
are women as they
Yep.
identify. That's what I mean. I don't believe in any essentialism of what that means.
Yeah.
Anyone who identifies as a woman inevitably is going to be in some way kind of marginalized, whether they're someone we see in the news who's considered powerful or not. I can guarantee in their lives
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going through all sorts of interesting marginalizations that are actually profoundly disturbing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of profoundly disturbing, or maybe not profoundly, but with I know with your speculative fiction, but also with some of your other fiction, that uncanny, because you did use that word before, and I wanted to come back to that. So that uncanny realism, what do you think it is that is just that little bit off or disturbing that really can make a book so or a story so compelling?
Well, I certainly do work with the uncanny, and the uncanny is when for me, when two
Hmm.
things don't go together like that, they go like that.
Hmm.
And so that kind of slippage, and all my stories are a bit off in some way. It might be a bit off in tone, it might be a bit off in events, it might be just a bit, something doesn't quite add up. And that's the bit that's the hardest to write. So it might be something just weird, like thinking back to my book Pushing Back, it might be snakes kind of suddenly appearing in vast numbers in a house, and it being suggestive of some disquiet in the colonial kind of environment. It might be something far more subtle. It might just be something in the way the tone shifts in a story where someone's talking about themselves and you think one thing is true, but then you realize they're an unreliable narrator and it may not be true. And so it varies a lot. It varies a lot. One of the things I try not to do is set characters up as people who are going to take stereotypical falls. So if someone is like in the last story of Beam of Light, there's a story, The Winged Nike of Samothrace, which is obviously a gay story, and a very gay friendly story. But what I don't want to do, it's being a gay story is irrelevant also to the story.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
relevant and it's not relevant in the
Hmm.
same way as that we sort of essentialize someone who may be, trans, and we try to essentialize their journey. Well, they are who they are,
Yeah.
and to be respected for who they are.
Yeah.
And their journey is their journey and to be respected. And I'm very, very, very strong on, even within my characters, respecting their right to be who they are, and not to essentialize their position as representing something. So a gay character does not represent gayness. A straight quotation marks character does not represent straightness,
Yep.
and so on and so on. I just don't want to essentialize people in that way. I want to respect everyone's journey. And this is something I deeply believe. It's not something that's just come up in the last few years for me. This is my life's mission and work, is to
Yep.
respect difference and to respect people's right to know who they are and what they want to be, and not have other people tell them you can't be that because
Yes.
you were born that, or
Yeah.
you can't be because I saw you go out with him, or I saw you go out with her, so you can't be that sort of person. That sort of, it's really offensive. My stories often deal with scenarios where it comes up and they might be uncomfortable, but I really don't essentialize the characters. They are not representative of anything other than who they are.
That's great. That's I think a gift to storytelling, and so I'm thinking also with that sense of uncanny. You mentioned in voice or in tone. Sorry, you mentioned in tone that uncanniness. How do you bring that out in your writing?
It's an interesting thing. There's two really distinct ways I actually go about it, and they happen at two different levels of the writing. The first is in my paragraph and skeleton early impression, that early draft, if you want to call it that, though I wouldn't call it quite a draft. It's something else. It's skeleton of idea. I usually put in something that's an idea that's completely off, that doesn't
Okay.
seem to fit. It's
Hmm.
an external idea I bring in that later I might try and fit. And then sometimes I can't remember what it was, and it becomes something else, as I've said, to be frank. Sometimes I remember really acutely, and it just goes where I want it to go and had wanted it to go. So
Yep.
that's the first way. The second way happens much further on in the process of drafting a story, and that's on the level of language, where I will change the register of language. So I might be writing a very matter-of-fact, quotidian, this is how it goes passage, just trying to get from A to B. This is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And then suddenly I will dislodge or depart into very poetic language. So a few lines of, and I don't like I like everything minimalist. I don't like too much of description. It's a strange thing. My stories, for anyone who's interested in this, don't describe people's features.
Okay.
I don't. I actually wrote an essay on this manifesto, which got published by an academic journal, but it's online somewhere. But it's about why I don't do this. Why I don't describe people's faces and bodies in detail. I'll give you a rough idea if it's necessary to the story, but I don't, because I really don't want to. How we view someone's features can be very judgmental. And it's not really the story I want to tell. It's about something else. Some people do it very effectively, and it's within the diegesis of the story, it's convincing, and you feel as if they're separated enough from it, which of course they can't be, but you feel they are, that it works. That's fine. But for me, I don't go there. So everything I do, I try and do in a minimalist way. So I'm writing this bit that's A to B, then I'll suddenly have a few lines of very poetic language. And that jarring produces the uncanny. It makes you feel that something weird's going on.
Yep.
Makes you reconsider what's come before. So it's that putting together the everyday language, if you like, which whatever that is. I don't know what it is, but you get the drift. Something that's just stating a series of events and things, through to something that's a little more poetic and abstract. If you overdo it, unless it's a story all like that, but if you overdo that sort of insertion process, it can become plodding and just dilutes the story down. But if you time it really well, it's all about timing. A story, especially short stories, are all about timing to my mind. If you time it right, it can shift the sensibility, and when they get to the end of the story, the reader can say, well, what on earth happened there? What was that about? It wasn't what I thought it was about. Was it really about a bat being stuck in someone's hair, or was the bat living inside their head? Or was it so on and so on and so on. So, and that takes it from being straightforward, a realist fiction, through to being fantastical fiction. I love the fantastical. There's a really interesting journal. It's called Science Fiction, a review of speculative literature. It's been published by Van Eycken at UWA for like 40 years. Anyway, I've done a special issue for him. It's just come out. It's double issue. It's got interviews and stories and novel extracts and all sorts of things. But what's really interesting is because it's speculative, he allowed me to entirely make it about my speculative work and about these issues of the uncanny and so on. And so a lot of what I talk about in those interviews is about the very specific issues of making fantastical literature, because I love the fantastical. I love where something seems to be one way and then just is completely, very much not. And see, I don't know about your life, but in my life, not in the way I go about my day-to-day life, which is pretty mundane, but I mean in my head, it makes fantastic leaps. I always I see a tree and suddenly it's growing features, and it's doing everything's animated in a different way from what it really is. And that's the other, probably, if we had a third, the most overt uncanny way is when I go fantastical completely, in that issue. It's all fantastical. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I am going to be getting my hands on that magazine very shortly. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, so what advice would you give to any starting out writers who might be listening, readers who might be thinking, oh, maybe I should or could, or maybe I will write something? What advice would you give them?
Well, the first thing is be who you are, not who people tell you to be. I really believe that. I believe it in everything in my life. Allow your identity to be created and shaped as much as you can by yourself. and not have other people tell you what you should be. I was very lucky growing up. My mother and father were divorced when I was very young, and my mother went through university when the marriage broke up, became a literature teacher, and so on. And part of her very big philosophy in life was about self-definition and letting people be who they are. So I was brought up in a very liberal-minded kind of household in which who you were is who you were, and that's fine, and it's not anyone else's business to tell you who you are. And I think that's really important as a writer. Even if you're a social realist writer, and I love community, and I'm a deep respecter of societal interaction and the kind of socialism of interaction, but you're always part of a lot of people of being who they are as well. You can be lots of different people together and make a social organism. That's great too. But I think it's really important to understand how you are as a writer and who you are as a writer, and then how the community around you is and how it relates to you and you relate to it. So they sound like really simple things, but I think it's important. And the other thing is, write every day if you can. It's for me, it's been the defining. I mean, I write a lot, but it's also come. I mean, it's an easy thing to say it's a lot, but it's also it is. And I dare say some people would say too much, but that's fine too. I don't have a problem with that. I write out of intrinsic interest. Every day I want to write and I'm interested. And if I fail, sometimes I fail. If I succeed, I succeed. If I'm in between, well, that's part of life too. Doesn't bother me, that stuff. What bothers me and would bother me is if I stop writing. I write because I feel it's an important way of processing the world and being respectful to the world too. I think a writer can be a really respectful person in the way they fit within community. That doesn't mean you don't critique community and all that. Of course you do, but that's part of it too. Community needs people who critique it as well.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I'd say. Write every day, and don't be dissuaded from writing or being who you are. Sounds like cliches, but I tell you what, if those cliches were real and people observed them, it'd be a lot happier planet, I tell you.
Well, and they wouldn't be cliches if they weren't abundant.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I suppose I'll add my little tuppence worth at the end, and that is as an environmentalist, do your best not to destroy the world around you.
Yeah.
You can't be a writer with no world.
This is so very, very true. You're 100% correct. So thank you, John. Before we go, where can our readers and listeners find you online?
Well, Tracy and I have a blog. We run a blog together, which we have for many years now, about 17 or 18 years, called Mutually Said. That's a very politicized blog. It's often critiquing, invasive mining companies, people knocking forests down. It's a very environmental, and it's feminist, it's vegan, it's anarchist, it's pacifist. Pacifist is a very important part of who we are. We don't believe in any form of violence to change things and so on. So you can find us there. But I'm around. My books are easily found, pretty easily found. Some of them, and I'm around. I can be found. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And of course, your books are available on all of the usual online bookshops as well as, absolutely. And there are so many magazines, anthologies, and articles that you have as well. So I know I'll be keeping an eye out.
And they also involve lots of other people too. I like to collaborate. I have some wonderful people I work with: Kwame Dawes, Charmaine Paper Talk Green, and Thurston Moore, and others, G. Thale and others. They're also, it's not just one person. We're all a community, and I don't operate in the vacuum. It's a dialogue, and when you pick up a magazine, read the other people as well. You
absolutely
pick one of my books on the shelf, look at someone else's as well. And if you don't look at me, look at them instead. That's fine too. It doesn't matter who you're looking at. You just got to think outside yourself, and that way you actually are truer to yourself as well.
That's brilliant. Well, once again, I'd like to thank you, John Kinsella, for joining the Australian Book Lovers podcast and for talking to us today or this evening. So as it'll be getting into your dinner time, I'm sure, at some point. So have a fabulous rest of your night. And thank you very much for joining us today.
A pleasure. Bye-bye.
John Kinsella, thank you so much for the chat and
great.
for the brilliant works that you've been putting out into the world for a long time. And I must admit, I did look up John's partner Tracy and have a look at some of her work, and that was also fascinating. So be at home, start reading early. He had a fabulous environment. You know, you talked earlier in the show about how important it was to have parental role models, and obviously John's were fantastic, and he's written since childhood. And I like that you and he spoke about the tonality of poetry and voice and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean he's got such a fabulous speaking voice too. I think that he could very easily be reading his own work. You can imagine at those readings just the flow, but the uncanny and the weird, the uncanny realism. I really enjoyed chatting with John about that, and it was a good old chat.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
A moment as the source or the setup, just not even a person, just a moment was where some of these stories began. I thought, oh yeah.
Yeah, it always fascinates me how people come up with ideas for short stories, and he's got so many. I'm like, how do you come up with that many ideas? But then I think about it, and it's actually ideas are everywhere.
Yeah.
And just taking a moment can so easily be brought out and lengthened and just become something fascinating. So it was a
It was a good chat.
great old chat. Yeah.
Yes, so there's another Australian book there for people to have a look. And if you want, go on to the Australian Book Lovers website and look at all of those lovely, lovely books you can read. Quotes, Laurie.
Oh, do you know, I actually found one this morning. I had a list of a couple of quotes, but then one popped up on my social media that I thought, you know what, I'm going to go with that one. So give me 2 seconds to bring up that copy, because I grabbed it because I'm like, oh, that's really good. I love that. So anyway, the amazing Joanne Harris has some unsolicited writing advice that she pops up onto her feeds, but I really liked this one. So starting to write is like starting to run. It helps to get into a routine. Little and often is easier than doing hours at once, and small manageable goals are easier to achieve and therefore more motivating than trying to imagine the finished work. And I thought that is a nice little reminder that it is the short goalposts, the short little milestones that every time you hit one, you think, yeah, I'm flying through. I'm really getting there. So it's a good reminder to have those short little, okay, I'm going to finish this section, or I'm going to finish writing this chapter, or I'm going to do some research on this, and that's going to be what I do today. And then you hit that milestone and you think, yes, I'm just flying through, rather than sitting there thinking, I have a whole book to write. It's going to take me 6 months. Ugh. I'm just thinking about it now, or in my case, editing, because I'm editing at the moment my book 2 of my White Fire series, and I just think there's so much to do, and I get overwhelmed by that sometimes. So I try to break it up into little pieces. I'll work on this chapter this week, or oh, I need to do some research in that area. And then when you hit those, it does feel like you're moving, rather than sitting still, stagnating on that one chapter that I've been sitting on for a while.
Hey, you're talking to, a culprit over here as well, but you're right, the small goals. And sometimes with editing, I list them all and I change the colors when I've done, and I do a percentage of what I've completed so that I can see the percentage creep up, which is good. I'm a bit of a visual, but yes, absolutely. Good quote. All right. Yeah. When I was looking for quotes for uncanny, a lot of them seem to come up with psychology, which was interesting. But there's one by Ernst Anton Jentsch, Jentsch, 1867 to 1919. He was a German psychiatrist and authored works on psychology and pathology, and is best known for his essay on the psychology of the uncanny. So there you go. Also authored texts on mood and the psychology of music. Remembered for his influence on psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who mentions him in his own essay, The Uncanny. There you go. So his quote, however, is, and it has a literary lean, in telling a story, one of the most successful devices for easily creating uncanny effects is to leave the reader in uncertainty whether a particular figure in the story is a human being or an automaton, and to do it in such a way that his attention is not focused directly on his uncertainty, so that he may not be led to go into the matter and clear it up immediately. So that's really good advice.
It is.
For writers, and
Yeah.
particularly as John was saying, his uncanny just slips in and you don't necessarily notice it, but all of them have this little twist.
Everything, it just feels wrong or odd, or
Yes.
which is, it's a fascinating mood to be able to put into a story. And I think obviously horror writers do this extremely well, but so do thriller writers and crime fiction, and really you can pop a bit of the uncanny into a lot, because the hook on the attention is like, oh wait, what's going on here? But it's such a subtle thing as well. I think
yeah.
with the uncanny, to just make you think something is wrong.
Yes, and it hooks into your brain, and then it doesn't give you enough to go on, like he was saying, your attention's not focused on that, but it's there.
And movies do it really good with just music.
Yes.
But you don't have music with a book. So it is so clever the way some authors can feed that in to really give you that uncertain feeling.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a skill.
It is a skill, for sure.
I probably don't have it.
And I think reading all of your works there is definitely a skill there, and the uncanny and mysteries and red herrings and all sorts of things, and twists and plots. So many turns it feels like a pretzel. So yes.
I like that. Can I quote that? I'm going to quote
that. Absolutely.
I like so many twists and turns. It's like a pretzel. I'm gonna
it's
that'll be my tagline for book 4.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, in absolutely. Bring it on.
I can quote the amazing VE pattern for
who says yes.
Love it.
Yeah. Do we know, are we allowed to share what the title of the book is?
No, I can't, and it's killing me. And I now know how it all ends. And I because there's 2, I forget
what's in the
bits pop
four,
up
what's
in
5?
4 and 5, and I'm like, I can't say anything because I'm gonna let the wrong thing slip. So
but still you have been much more prolific than Philip Pullman, who, let's say, was 31 years or something ridiculous. I know, probably not that long, but it's a long time between books, Philip. But anyway, appreciate you getting to the Book of Dust eventually. And I want no comeback from any of my readers who say, yeah, what about you, Veronica? I'm getting there.
It's happening.
The hip is getting better. I've got to get out of this chair. So we need to say goodbye. And remember to read more Aussie books. Thanks, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.
Let's meet again, where magic happens.